Hi, my name is Jeff D'Amelio, and I'm going to share a small portion of my testimony with you this morning. I grew up in Forest Park, and for those of you who don't know where that's at, it's a near west suburb of Chicago here, right next to Oak Park. I was a typical suburban kid. We didn't have a lot of money, but we weren't poor either. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and my dad was a union painter. When I was a youngster, my mom would go to church a lot, and we occasionally attended as a family. The church was an old-school German Baptist church where she grew up. All I remember is that it had a lot of old Germans who spoke with very heavy accents. I went to Sunday school most Sundays during my younger adolescent years. Then when I was around the age of 11 or 12, my dad had some health issues, and he started to attend church too. He became born again, and we started going to church every Sunday. Eventually, we got baptized as a family when I was around 12. I guess I wasn't really ready to get baptized, or I was just a rebellious kid, because after that, I began hating church more and more. I thought my dad was getting weird hanging around these church people. Around this time, the neighborhood and the church were changing. This caused many disagreements in the church, and some of the people even quit the church over the changes. If someone at the church wasn't living their life as a model person, they would even tell them not to come. If one of the young ladies, for example, was pregnant, and she wasn't married, they told her not to come back to church. As a young teen, I started to see these people as big hypocrites. Yet my dad was becoming more involved in his relationship with Christ. I was moving further and further away. As a teen in my 20s, I watched all the TV evangelists on the news getting busted for taking funds that didn't belong to them, and other religious characters on TV flaunt their flashy suits and expensive cars. I pretty much thought church stuff was all a scam. I wasn't a bad teenager, but I did all the stuff a non-Christian would do, and I grew further and further from Christ during my teens and 20s. When I was 21 or 22, I got a job as a truck driver at the shop my dad worked at. It was a large shop with about 200 painters, and everybody there had a nickname. My dad, he was known as the Holy Roller, and some of the guys called me the Demon Seed because I was so opposite of him. During my 20s, I knew who Christ was, and I believed he died for my sins, but that was about it. I didn't have much of a relationship or pray unless I was in some sort of trouble or I really wanted something. When I was 23, I met my future wife at a party. We dated for a year or so and decided to get married, but we didn't have Christ in our lives, and that made things real rough. She had a rough childhood filled with alcoholism, and I had a real bad temper. Even though we loved each other, our first 10 years of marriage were filled with lots of screaming, yelling, and broken stuff, usually by me. I was convinced everything was mine because I earned the money to pay for it, and I neglected to see all the work that was involved in being a mom and a wife. Every time we had a disagreement, I would bring up the "it's my house, my stuff" argument. I knew my dad prayed for us, and he had this strange way of calling right after Tanya and I would have a huge fight. Usually I wasn't home, and he spoke with Tanya, sharing the gospel and giving good advice. Tanya and I couldn't figure out how he knew we were fighting or why he would call when there was trouble. We now know that this was the Lord working, because if it weren't for his calls and advice to Tanya, we might have been divorced. In September of '97, my dad passed away from a heart attack. I was a little confused at how God could let this happen to someone who was a Christian. How could he let this happen? I don't know. How could he take a husband away from a woman who didn't even know how to put gas in her car? I wasn't mad at God, I just didn't understand. Well, about 6 years ago, the kids were asking more and more questions about God that Tanya and I just couldn't answer. We felt the need to find a church. We tried a few churches, but they seemed more interested in rituals than teaching. One day the kids got a flyer at school about the day camp. So they went to the day camp here and they had a great time. About a month or so later, Pastor Bill stopped by when I was working on the house. and he invited us to church. He spoke with us for about 5 minutes, and then he left. Well, I looked outside, and I noticed when he left, he had a junky old minivan. I was surprised that a pastor from Bloomingdale would drive such a cheap car. A few months later, we were discussing the God thing again and the need to find a church, so we decided to try that Bloomingdale church. I was blown away the first Sunday at the modern service and the cool projector system. The pastors were putting on a drama dressed as Bible characters Joseph and Moses. I've never been to a church service I actually enjoyed. We had to come back. On our next Sunday, after the service, Scott and Barb Blank said hi to us after the service. We came back a few more Sundays, and they saw us, and it looked like they were knocking down chairs just to come over and say hi to us and ask how we were doing. Well, this made a really big impression on us, and it was very strange that people were friendly and helpful. A few Sundays after that, Daniel Riemenschneider said hi to us, and he remembered our last name. I was impressed at how anybody would take the time to remember us. Well, after that, Tanya and I took the Crown class offered, and it really, really opened my eyes. And then a few months later, I took the Alpha course, and the Holy Spirit kind of took over after there. I became a table helper, and I convinced Tanya to take the next Alpha course that was offered. We let Christ into our lives, and everything changed for the better. The list of changes that took place, I could go on for hours, so I'll make it short. And I'll just say, our marriage has been changed completely, and the way we raise our children have too. Tanya and I, well, we still have arguments every now and then, but Christ helps me with my severe anger management issues. Thanks.